I'm here with professor, attorney, and previous presidential candidate, Ralph Nader. Thanks for joining us today, Mr. Nader.
You're welcome.
Unigo.com ranked American University as one of the top 10 schools in the country for having famous faculty members. I know you teach courses on law at American. What do you think the importance of educating the youth of tomorrow about consumer advocacy and law is?
Well, first of all, it deals with their lives, health, safety, economic well-being. So from a personal interest, you want to know about consumer law, whether you're signing on a dotted line with these contracts, or you're trying to buy a car, or health insurance, or just how do you evaluate the doctor you're going to choose, or the hospital you're going to have to be in. So just from that point of view of self-interest, but overall, if you don't have prominence to consumer law, what happens is that the economy twists in favor of the sellers, the big corporations, and that inverts priorities, because an economy first and foremost should be for the consumer's well-being.
Sure.
As Adam Smith once said, the function of all production. Oh, he said it this way. Adam Smith once said, the purpose of all production is consumption.
Okay. So when did you get your start in consumer advocacy? You started at a very young age.
Yes. Well, I lost a lot of friends in traffic crashes. In those days, it was 5 times greater per 100 million vehicle miles traveled that people would get killed.
Sure.
So in high school, college, I would lose my friends. I became interested in why cars are so unsafe. There were no seatbelts, no airbags, no padded dash panels, no side protection, no head restraints, you know, on and on. And that's what got me interested. And I saw a lot of crashes because I used to hitchhike all over the country. And sometimes we'd come up with a crash before the police in emergency, and it was a grisly sight.
Sure. So that's how you got your start. I know, speaking of famous faculty, that's unsafe at any speed is what really jump-started your career. Would you agree? Then you ran for president. You started running for president. What kind of pressure is on a presidential candidate when you're running for president of the United States?
Well, in some ways, not as much as being a consumer advocate, taking on big corporations. And when you take on General Motors, and the purpose is to get them regulated by the federal government for the first time in American history, they don't go down easy. And they hired detectives to follow me up on Capitol Hill. They were caught. They had great congressional hearings, and that helped enact the 2 key laws, the Motor Vehicle and Highway Safety laws in 1966, which Lyndon Johnson signed in September of that year. That was a lot of pressure. Sure. Because you never knew where the detectives, you know, what was going on.
Yeah, sure. And going along with pressure, what kind of pressure, not only when you're advocating for consumers, but how about when you're in a debate? I know that you held your own presidential debate for third-party candidates on November 4th. What kind of pressure goes along with the debate when you're trying to get your point across? And what's wrong with the debate system today? Candidates being able to come prepared.
Yeah. Well, you start with a 2-party dictatorship, Republican, Democrat.
Sure.
More than any other Western country, they obstruct competition from third parties in dozens of ways. Ballot access barriers, for example, they exclude you from their debates, which they control. On and on, harassment of petitioners, baseless lawsuits. We got all of that treatment. And the problem is that if you don't have a competitive democracy, you're not giving enough voices and choices to the voter. So if candidates can't come on with new agendas and new ideas, the voters are left with the least worst. You know, you have to choose one or the other. So it's very tough for third parties to even have their own debate. And we managed to see a few of them this year, some of them covered by the New York Times. And so I think they're slowly starting to break through. But to show you how bad it is, running for the presidency as a third-party candidate is like climbing a sheer cliff with a slippery rope. And if you want more details, opendebates.org will give you the whole story.
Okay. Speaking of cliffs, the fiscal cliff, how do you think Obama is going to overcome the pressure and hold up against people saying you shouldn't go along with it? These are things, the economy is really, really on everyone's mind. As he came into office and the stock market took a crash 2 days in a row. What's it going to take from President Obama to get over this economic barrier?
Well, it's going to take a dose of fortitude, political guts, standing up to the corporate lobbyists, the right-wing Republicans on the Hill, who, it's their way or the highway. And I don't know whether he's got that capability. He didn't show it in the first term, but now he doesn't have to worry about re-election. So we'll see. But it does help for people around the country to pressure the White House, because he needs to be given a backbone in the coming weeks.
Sure. And how do people go about doing that from a student's perspective, from a professional's perspective? How do you go about pressuring the White House?
Well, here in Washington, you just demonstrate in front of the White House. You can call in. They've got a caller line. But an even better way is to surround the congressional offices back home with demonstrators and a determination to meet with each senator and representative. Sure. You got 16 million college and graduate students, plenty of manpower there.
Sure. You have a new book out, The 17 Solutions. In your book, you speak about raising the minimum wage, which would be a way to jumpstart our economy. Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit more about that and how that will work?
Well, that's a key example of how the two parties are in the pockets of the Walmarts and the McDonald's, because you have 30 million workers in this country between the minimum wage federally of 7.25 and what it would be if it was adjusted for inflation from 1968 to now. It would be $10.56. Okay, that's 30 million workers are making less in inflation-adjusted dollars than workers made 44 years ago. That's how bad it is. So if they get a federal bill and you raise the minimum wage, you have tens of billions of dollars jump-starting the economy, because they're going to be spending that money for the necessities of life. That adjusted minimum wage comes in at over 70% in the polls. It's very popular because, going back to 1968, catching up with 1968, so it's good all around. 2/3 of low-income workers are hired by big companies like McDonald's and Walmart, and their CEOs are making an average of $10 million a year, which breaks down to thousands of dollars an hour.
Yeah. Why do you think the president hasn't taken any action or looked into this more yet in his administration? And have you sent him a copy of the book? Has he?
Yeah, we sent him letters and all kinds of things, but he never answers. Because the unions are not pushing him. The unions don't have to worry about minimum wage. Their members are above the minimum wage. The AFL-CIO is very good on paper, pushing for a living wage, but it doesn't really use its muscle with the White House. It doesn't put the message out on their many TV advertisements, which are not very good. And the other thing is that the 30 million workers are so desperate trying to get through the day, they're not organizing themselves in little pockets in congressional districts. And if they did, they'd get action. I thought Occupy Wall Street could have done it by themselves when they were at their peak last fall. But they weren't organized enough to do it.
How do you think the president's going to get any of this done when the Democrats don't have the majority in the House?
Well, that's the key problem. And he's got to go around the country and beat the drums and try to get heat on enough of the Republicans so that on key issues they spin away from Speaker Boehner. And he can do that. He's got the bully pulpit. But if he doesn't, if he plays an inside the Beltway in Washington game, they'll stop him in the House.
If you could say one thing to President Obama right now about the economy and what it's going to take to fix it, what would you say?
First of all, restore the taxes on the wealthy. Bring the taxes on corporations to the level of the prosperous 1960s. You'll have hundreds of billions of dollars a year just on that alone. Cut corporate welfare, corporate subsidies, handouts, giveaways, huge money there. Clip the tax shelters and the tax havens that allow, for example, 30 large corporations, which we all know, Verizon, General Electric, year after year, pay no federal income tax, zero. Maybe in 1 year they all made $160 billion in profits. So that's one. And the second is, if you're going to cut Medicare and Medicaid, and so do not cut the benefits, cut the fraud, cut the overcharging of medicines, cut the billing fraud. All of this adds up to hundreds of billions of dollars a year. I mean, when I say to college students, do you know how much overbilling there is in the healthcare industry, which is coming in at about $2.8 trillion this year? A minimum of $280 billion just in billing computerized billing, fraud, and abuse. That's a figure that was established years ago by the Government Accountability Office of the U.S. Congress and by the leading expert at Harvard, Professor Malcolm Sparrow. So you don't cut the benefits, you cut the vendors' lard and overcharging and fraud.
How corrupt is Wall Street right now?
Well, it's very self-centered, very self-seeking, very deceptive. It often recommends stock that it's selling on the side. It engages in casino capitalism, which is making money from money, otherwise known as derivatives, which basically are bets on bets on bets. What does that do for people? It's not a real economy, it's a paper gambling economy. And they make a lot of money out of it, but they're playing around with people's money, pension money, mutual fund money. And when Wall Street collapsed, as it did in 2008, 2009, there wasn't one of those crooks went to jail. They weren't prosecuted. And so what they did, they spent their time coming to Washington for a bailout on the backs of American taxpayers after unemploying 8 million workers. So Wall Street has to be severely circumscribed and regulated, because even for its ostensible function, it doesn't raise much equity capital. It's just a gambling casino.
Yeah. Well, we're just about out of time here, but one more question. You've been quoted saying, if you're not turned on to politics, politics will turn on you. I know you spoke about getting out in front of the White House and emailing, sending letters to your representatives. What else can people do to get involved?
Well, spend less time looking at screens and more time marching, demonstrating, going to town meetings, city council meetings, showing up in courts, voting as smart voters, demanding more third-party and alternative candidates. It doesn't take all that much time. The big secret of democracy is twofold. One, it works, if we work it, and two, it's a lot easier than we think. In the 17 Solutions book, the subtext is, we got 17 solutions to turn our country around, make your own family, personal life better, safer, more productive, happier, as well as our country, and what we do to advance the state of happiness in the world, right? And it's a lot easier than people think. But if they grow up thinking that it's impossible, you can't fight City Hall, you can't take on ExxonMobil, guess what? They make themselves powerless. You don't have to wait for the powerful to make themselves powerless. So when I talk to students and they say, I'm not turned on to politics, that's when I thought up of answering and say, well, if you don't turn on politics, politics will turn on you, because politics is the congealed power of a society. And if the corporations control that political power in Washington and your state capital, you're going to be the loser. And it ain't going to be theoretical. It's going to be in your employment opportunities, the kind of community life you live in, the environment, the health, the safety, the planet. And so if you don't turn on to politics, look at history, where other people didn't turn on in other countries even more, and politics turned on them. Yeah. They often say that's a dictatorship.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Nader. Author of the 17 Solutions, former presidential candidate. It was a pleasure to have you today, Mr. Nader.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.